combine it with some meaningful understanding of the faith. And so tonight we're going to be doing an art project, but first we're going to talk about something very important. So before we get into that, I'm going to have Jamie open us with a prayer. Can you? No, whatever you want to do. You want to come up here?
I'll do one from memory. Kathy, this is ridiculous right here. Kathy has a little step here. Intone, O my servant, the verses of God, which have been received by thee, as intoned by them who have drawn nigh unto him, that the sweetness of thy melody may kindle thine own soul and attract the hearts of all men. Whoso reciteth in the privacy of his chamber the verses revealed by God, the scattering angels of the Almighty shall scatter abroad the fragrance of the words uttered by his mouth, and cause the heart of every righteous man to throb. And though he may at first remain unaware of its effects, yet the virtue of the grace vouchsafed unto him must needs sooner or later exercise its influence upon his soul. Thus have the mysteries of the revelation of God been received, by the virtue of the will of him who is the source of power and wisdom.
Thank you. We are going to talk a little bit about the messengers of God. And all of the things that I'm going to bring up from the Baha'i writings are as true for Jesus and Moses, Zoroaster, Buddha, Krishna, the ones who came to the American Indians, many that we will never know their names because we know thousands of them have come to humankind over the centuries. But we want you to understand this. In fact, the Universal House of Justice, the Baha'i International Governing Body, which way do I have to point it up? Oh. We'll see if we can get the clicker to work. All right, here we go. Wait a minute. Okay. The Baha'is worldwide are in the middle of what we call the 9-year plan. And in the letter setting forth what we have been called upon to do during this very important 9 years, we have been asked to engage in conversations on spiritual themes, sometimes even talking to whole families or peer groups. And the House of Justice has asked us to take part in meaningful conversations which awaken interest in the vision of the faith and the person of Baha'u'llah. And it has occurred to me that many people can't do that, the vision of the faith and the person of Baha'u'llah. So for a conference that was held back in November, I prepared one talk on the vision of the faith and one on the person of Baha'u'llah. I'm not going to give the whole person of Baha'u'llah talk tonight because of the art project, but I'm going to do the opening of it, and maybe some other time we can go through the whole thing. It's about an hour to talk about that. Isn't this a beautiful, beautiful bird done by the famous calligrapher Mishkin Kalam? And it is actually got a bird made from the script of a word. You can see the lettering in there. The bird is a very important symbol in the Baha'i faith. You will see it all throughout the Baha'i writings. And one of my favorite passages where he uses this image is this one. Many of you will be familiar with it because it's the opening line of a very important one of Baha'u'llah's writings. Lo, the nightingale of paradise singeth upon the twigs of the tree of eternity with holy and sweet melodies, proclaiming to the sincere ones the glad tidings of the nearness of God. calling the believers in the divine unity to the court of the presence of the generous one, informing the severed ones of the message which hath been revealed by God, the King, the glorious, the peerless, guiding the lovers to the seat of sanctity and to this resplendent beauty. So the first duty that God has given all of us is to investigate reality. And part of that is to find the source for information about God. God never leaves us alone. He always has sent a messenger for the time in which we live. And it is their duty to look for him or her and to know what to look for when we encounter that person. Here is what Abdu'l-Baha said about this. What does it mean to investigate reality? It means that man must forget all hearsay and examine truth himself, for he does not know whether statements he hears are in accordance with reality or not. Wherever he finds truth or reality, he must hold on to it, forsaking, discarding all else, for outside of reality there is naught but superstition and imagination. So what are the attributes of manifestations of God that distinguish them from the rest of humanity? Now you notice Baha'is use a word manifestation. In Christianity they use the word incarnation because many Christians believe that God descended into the world, took on a human form, and walked among us. Baha'is would say that a better understanding would be that Jesus, Moses, Abraham manifested God rather than incarnated God. Who was Jesus praying to? And he constantly referred to his Father. The whole idea of an incarnation is a fairly recent thing that happened about 300 years after Jesus passed away. So the most important point to understand for me is that these people are not normal human beings. They are absolutely not normal human beings who at some point became enlightened. I know many people look on the Buddha as someone who was a normal human being who became enlightened. And you will see from this that that's simply not the case. I told you we were going to talk about trees. Sudaratul Muntaha, excuse my Persian, friends. I don't pronounce this very well. I think it's actually Arabic, Sudaratul Muntaha. Thank you there. Yes, thank you. So, this is the tree that marks the end of the road, the end of the lane. In Islam, it means the tree beyond which there is no passing. It marks a border between civilization and the wilderness, the unknown. In Islam, it's also one of the terms for a tree in paradise that marks the point beyond which the cherubim, those who attend to the throne of God, cannot go beyond that to get closer to God. So it marks a boundary. We also talk about the divine lot tree in the Baha'i faith, which is another symbol for the messenger of God. But I want to stick with this tree. Lo, the nightingale of paradise singeth upon the twigs of the tree of eternity with holy and sweet melodies. You will see this tree, Sudaratul Muntaha, or divine lot tree, or tree, the tree image throughout Baha'u'llah's writings. And with it, you often see a bird. He likens the messengers of God to birds. He says, these birds of the celestial throne are all sent down from the heaven of the will of God. Now think about this. Once you understand this image, You won't be able to get it out of your mind, and that's one reason we're going to play with it, with the art project. You have heaven over here, earthly reality over here. The boundary has the Sudarato Mantaha, that tree that marks the boundary between this world and the spirit world. The messenger of God is a bird sitting at the top of that tree. He sees both the spirit world and this world all the time. He can tell us what's going on in the spirit world. And he can tell the spirit world what's going on here. He's everywhere all the time. Something we can't do. He has a reality in both worlds. That's why we can trust him. Why he knows what we don't know, because he is that bird sitting on that tree, marking the boundary between the two worlds, and sees both of them at the same time. Once you understand that, it's real easy to understand what Baha'u'llah is talking about. From their perches on the divine lote tree, these birds see both heaven and earth. I love the fact that this image also has clouds in it, because clouds is an image in both Christian and the Bible, and also in Baha'i literature and the Quran, for the veils. It's a fog that keeps us from seeing these birds, from seeing what is true reality. Ah, yes, yeah. Yeah. The clouds, the veils, the things that keep us from seeing. And what are these kinds of veils? They're the things that our grandparents told us about religion that are superstitious. They're our love of the material world. There are our friends and family who don't want us to go down a different pathway. There are lots of veils. There are veils about the messengers of God. I mean, Moses committed murder, and he stuttered. Jesus was a bastard, which meant he had a stigma throughout his life in the world he lived in. They all have veils, things that keep people from seeing who they really are. We also like to use another image, and this is one that Baha'is are more familiar with. All the perfections, bounties, and splendors of the one true God are plainly visible in the realities of his holy manifestation, even as the light of the sun is fully reflected with all its perfections and bounties in a clear and spotless mirror. So when Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, he's correct, because we are looking at a pure mirror when we see Jesus. When we look at Baha'u'llah, Muhammad, any of these, we are seeing a stainless, spotless mirror that reflects God. But just as we can't look at the sun directly without hurting our eyes, we can't look at God directly. But we can see the sun if we look in a mirror. You know, one of my thought processes, I like history. What can I say? Jesus couldn't have talked about a mirror because people didn't really have true mirrors during his lifetime. That only was available after the time of Muhammad, where we had the technology to create a mirror. So Baha'u'llah uses mirrors a lot. This is very important. This is from Gems of Divine Mysteries. By the way, Gems of Divine Mysteries is a fairly new book to the Baha'i community because it was only translated into English a few years ago. It's much shorter than the Kitab-i-Igan, which is a long book explaining all of this. It's very short. It's sort of a mini Kitab-i-Igan and a mini hidden words rolled into one little book, written before those other two books. Know thou that God, exalted be he, doth in no wise manifest his inmost essence and reality. That door is absolutely closed. It's even closed to the messengers of God. They can't get to his inmost reality. The cherubim can't get there. From time immemorial, he hath been veiled in the eternity of his essence and concealed in the infinitude of his own being. And when he purposed to manifest his beauty in the kingdom of names and to reveal his glory in the realm of attributes, he brought forth his prophets from the invisible plane to the visible, that his name, the manifest, might be distinguished from the hidden, and his name, the last, might be discerned from the first, and that there may be fulfilled the words, he is the first and the last, the seen and the hidden, and he knoweth all things. Thus hath he revealed these most excellent names and most exalted words in the manifestations of his self and the mirrors of his being. So he is beyond our ability, the way he created us, to ever comprehend God. We just can't go there, you know. It's like the limit in calculus, for those of you who ever had that inflicted on you in school. We can't get there. We can't get there, you know. Our brains can't get there. We can't think of even how big the universe is, much less the one who created it. And so he gave us this beings, this cadre of beings who periodically manifest him here in this reality. And they're all equal. All of these, they're all trained the same way. They're all immortal, and they're all, to call them brothers would not be doing the justice. They're companions, spiritual companions, equal spiritual companions. For they are all the manifestations of the name of God, the dawning places of his attributes, the repositories of his might, and the focal points of his sovereignty, whilst God, magnified be his might and glory, is in his essence sanctified above all names and exalted beyond even the loftiest attributes. So when we talk about his glory, his might, his sovereignty, this is just earthly names, earthly ideas. He's well beyond any of that. Consider likewise the evidences of divine omnipotence, both in their souls and in their human temples, that thine heart may be assured, and that thou mayest be of them that speed through the realms of his nearness. These people who he sends have been given much of God's power. They are omnipotent. That means they can do anything, okay? Even though they have human bodies, they look like human people. They eat, they get tired, they get sick, just like the rest of us. But that's not who they really are. It always begins with a baby. This is how God works. He sends us a baby, and we have to find him, like the three wise men, you know, the Magi. I love this particular slide. This is a spot in Israel along the Sea of Galilee. It's a natural waterfall where the fishermen would clean their nets. And it's the likely location, because it's so near to Capernaum and some other important places, where Jesus first called his first disciples, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, while they were cleaning their nets here in this waterfall. So these peasants, illiterate peasants, why would they answer this call when Jesus said, "Come follow me and I shall make you fishers of men"? Why would they do that? They had families to feed. They had to worry about where everyone's next meal was coming from, how they were going to pay their taxes, all of the same things that we do. And yet, they dropped what they were doing and they followed this peasant carpenter all over the Galilee. When we get the call, what do? So what would they have known? One thing is that they knew a little bit about Jesus from John the Baptist, so they weren't totally surprised when he showed up. They were looking for particular signs from Judaism and Jewish prophecies. Here are some additional things that we know about these people. First of all, as I said, they're immortal. Their soul, we believe, comes into existence at the time the egg and sperm fertilize the egg. Sometime around that point, a soul comes into being. Their souls have existed from the point where God created creation. So they existed long before they come to earth, and they are immortal like our soul is immortal after we're created. God would not have had the universe and creatures had he not had a way to communicate with them. So in the Baha'i writings it says that but for this group of messengers, he wouldn't have created creatures. He had to have a means of communicating with them. And so that was a precondition for his creation. Remember they're these perfect mirrors. They perfectly reflect the will of God and are, by their nature, infallible because of that. Everything they say is 100% correct. They each also have an individual mission and individuality. So Jesus had a different mission from Muhammad, from Abraham, from Moses, and so forth. They have individuality. When they come, it is Judgment Day. The people who believe in them are separated from the people who don't accept them. Each inaugurates a new cycle and civilization, a new day. You know, Jesus says you don't put new wine in old wineskins, right? So in this day it's not that we threw out the previous messengers. We have a new dispensation. We have new teachings. And they are given primacy. They were all educated in the primary school. Now, friends, I have no idea what the primary school is other than that the Bob referred to it. So somehow or other, they all have been educated by God in a way we don't understand before they came and started their missions here on earth. They are all capable of performing miracles and have miraculous lives. We know Jesus raised the dead. Baha'u'llah raised one man from the dead twice, Mirza Jafar. I mean, you know, they all have miracles that they perform. They all have superhuman knowledge. They all arrive with an entourage of exceptionally saintly people. So, you know, when Jesus says that John the Baptist is the return of Elijah, he doesn't mean he has the same soul as Elijah, but it's the same spirit and mission as Elijah. And we know that each messenger of God brings a great lady. You know, Mary Magdalene, for example, with Jesus. Baha'u'llah's daughter, Bahia. Tahirih, the great poetess who came with the Bab, and so forth. Muhammad's daughter, Fatima. Moses' sister. So they all bring saintly people. They all have an entourage. They reveal their teachings in an elevated manner. They talk in an elevated way. They talk about two things. They talk about high spiritual principles that are always true, and then they have more immediate specific teachings for the time that they're living in. All of them, without exception, are rejected and suffer, and this usually comes from the religious leaders of their time. All of them fulfill prophecies from earlier messengers of God, and they all have the ability to command, and it happens. From them hath all creation proceeded, and unto them shall return all that hath been mentioned. There are different types of messengers, and the most important ones are independent manifestations endowed with constancy, and this group are the ones who bring a book. Like Elijah did not bring a book. He continued to rely on the Torah, for example, the book brought by Moses. So they each bring a book if they are independent manifestations endowed with constancies. And then there are follower prophets who are like the moon to the sun of the independent prophets. So, for example, Ali to Muhammad, like Elijah and Elisha and the Old Testament prophets to Moses. Some of the saints, Peter and the other early disciples, were prophets who were like the moon to the sun of Jesus. And then there are very special manifestations who bring in a whole new big cycle. These are supreme universal manifestations. Baha'u'llah is the only one that we know of. He's the one that came and began the Baha'i faith. And he says, this is truly a revelation which revealeth itself only once every 500,000 years. We are in the cycle which began with Adam and whose universal manifestation is Baha'u'llah. So all the manifestations who are going to come after him will still be under his shadow. We don't know what that means and why that's important. We just know this because he says so. And he's infallible. A couple more points and then we're going to send you off to do an art project. This is Abdu'l-Baha talking about this. He says, the prophets of God are the first educators. They bestow universal education upon man and cause him to rise from the lowest levels of savagery to the highest pinnacles of spiritual development. It's like when they bring a new revelation, a new teaching, it's a series of teachings, even the people who do not know about them are affected because it becomes an idea whose time has come. You've heard that phrase? The philosophers, too, are educators along lines of intellectual training. At most, they've only been able to educate themselves and a limited number about them to improve their own morals and, so to speak, civilize themselves. But they have been incapable of universal education. They have failed to cause an advancement for any given nation from savagery to civilization. Who here is willing to die for Voltaire? What about Hume? What about Aristotle? You know, we like to read these people. They give us insights. But nobody is willing to completely change a civilization from these great thinkers. So last thing here, what was Baha'u'llah like as a person? This is his human nature. He was a very loving, playful person who loved young children and was very attracted to nature, flowers, and he loved greenery. He loved to be in the countryside and to see nature. There's a story where Rahia Khanum, when she was first living with Shoghi Effendi as her husband, there were many elderly people around who remembered Baha'u'llah. And you know, I think many of us think of Baha'u'llah as manifesting justice. We have a view of a sterner person than Abdu'l-Baha, who was so amazingly loving. And so she actually had the gall to say that one day to some elderly Baha'is who remembered Baha'u'llah, that they couldn't imagine that he was as loving as Abdu'l-Baha. And they looked at her and said, "Are you kidding? Compared to Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha wasn't loving at all." I mean, that we can't get our head around that. I can't even get my head around Abdu'l-Baha, much less Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah had no formal education, and his father, even though he was a prominent man, he was prominent in politics. They didn't hang around with prominent educators and holy men and theologians. So he didn't have those people in his world when he's growing up. He was taught to read and write, but he didn't have any real schooling and education. He came from great wealth and status. He was known as the father of the poor in Tehran for the ministry he did when he was a young man in his 20s to the poor of Tehran. Even as a child, he was unusual, and it was clear to his parents that he was destined for something remarkable. He had exceptional knowledge, wisdom, and intelligence, yet he was humble, capable. I mean, he would cook food for the household when they were in Baghdad, for example. Many life skills. He was excellent horseman. He could cook. He was a fabulous calligrapher and so forth. Swordsman. He had a very strong sense of humor. By the way, Nawab, his wife, was known for her sense of humor. She was a very funny lady. He was not drawn to worldly pursuits, attainments, or possessions. He was offered high government offices and so forth and just said, nope, not interested. And then my very favorite attribute of Baha'u'llah, he was about my height. He was really short. So, peace be upon him that inclineth his ear unto the melody of the mystic bird calling from the Sudaratal Mantaha. So, dear friends, take these lofty ideas and this wonderful image of birds and trees and mirrors and clouds, and let's see what you can create in the next 45 minutes to an hour. And we have Jamie and, yes, Susie are going to be your assisters in this. We have boxes full of stuff. We also have Tony here, who is a great composer, so if a group of you would like to get together and work on a song or something, we can do that. If you want to write a poem. Anyway, let's see what we can come up with. All right, dear friends? Thank you very much. Have a good evening.